Hey, what's up, One Church? If you're glad to be in God's house, come on, somebody make a little bit of noise in here. I want to say hello to everybody here in Gahanna. Good to see you all. I want to say what's up to everybody at Northwest. Come on, why don't we do this? Gahanna, why don't you give Northwest some love, and Northwest give it back, all right? Go ahead. You could just hear each other hooting and hollering. Two different locations, part of the same body. And of course, want to say hello to everybody online, joining us from wherever you're joining from. By the way, speaking of online, that's what I did last week. I took the week off. I'm trying to do a little bit better coming out of all this. These last couple of years have been wild and crazy for our church. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to be healthy and make it for the long haul, I got to practice what I preach about rest and taking some time off. So last week I did what a bunch of y'all do. I stayed in bed and watched church. It was kind of awesome. I was in there, in my jammies and, a cup of coffee, and I was on YouTube. I just want to give honor to Pastor Michael Young, who did an amazing job last week. Thankful. Learned all about his fraternity house and the roaches and, applied all that to my life. And it was great, man. And do want to say to those of you joining online, first of all, would you do us a favor? Would you go in the comments right now and let us know where you're joining from? That's like part of our fun every week. We're like, man, somebody from here, somebody from there. Other cities, other states, other countries, literally, we're finding new people every week. And, this whole COVID thing, when it shut everything down, everything was forced digitally. It really opened up a new frontier that we found out that not only are we able to get the message to people, all over the world, but we've been able to connect people to the church, like actually into community. So we have groups right now that meet on Zoom, that, some people are in person in Columbus, in this area, and then some are in other places. Also, people are serving this body digitally from all over the world. So it's just kind of opened up this new horizon. So if you're watching, this is more than just you can hear a message. You can actually join a community. You'll see throughout the message and the comments, there's links and things. You can fill out your Connect card and get connected within the church. I do want to make one announcement before I get in the message. We're in the process of coming back. We started kind of phase one of the comeback this past fall in 2020. Obviously doing restrictions. The reason we did not only the restrictions, but the registrations is so that we would have an idea of how many people were coming so we could distance in a responsible way. And, we're starting to see the world coming back. The COVID numbers are dipping. Our own governor said, hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And we're starting to see restaurants coming back, shopping's coming back. Ohio State announced they're going to be doing their commencement is going to be in person. If you go to fitness centers, they're bustling and hopping. Okay, so we're going to kind of take our next step in the comeback process. And after Easter, the week after Easter, we are going to lift registrations, which means you don't need to go reserve your spot online. You can just show up to church. Now, let me tell you the cause and effect of that. Okay, that means that we're not going to be distancing, in the auditorium. So if you come to church, there's a good chance you're going to be sitting next to someone. And I understand that. We're going to continue to wear masks as long as that mandate's there. We're going to do that. But you will be sitting next to someone. So I get it. I think each of us have different feelings about these things, but I think it's time to come back. Okay, if we can go to Target together, if we can go to Cheesecake Factory together, if we can work out together, I think we can go to church together and worship God. If you're in a place where you're like, man, this is bothering me, I don't feel like I want to sit next to people, we're still full throttle online, and I think in short order, we're going to be in a place where it's all going to be lifted anyway. So we're going to do this responsibly. You're going to start seeing these things walk back, and it will continue to wear the mask, but we won't be doing the distancing, all right? Okay, I'm going to jump into today's message. We're calling it Fingerprints. I was actually planning to do this series only in February. My wife Shaylin and I tag teamed this fingerprint series throughout the month of February, and I thought we were going to be done there. But as we were working and preparing, there was just so many good lessons that I decided to go ahead and carry this all the way up until Easter. And what we've been building it out of is Romans 1:20 that says, "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. And through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God." It's one of my favorite verses because it just will preach to you for the rest of your life if you'll let it. He's saying, in essence, when we look at the ecosystem, when we look at nature, we look at the world, we see the fingerprints of God. Not only what God made, but why he made it the way he did. And we see that, we see his DNA, we see his character qualities and his personality, and we learn things about God by looking at science and looking at nature. And so we've been doing that throughout the series. Today, even though my wife's not with me, I'm gonna kind of bring her up here with me via picture. Go ahead and bring this up. I'm gonna can keep it going on nature here today. That's a real picture, friend. That's not Photoshop. That was 2018 at a place called Gatorland, which it's a real place. Never been there personally. I don't plan to go. Not my style, not my vibe to go hang out with gators. To me, this picture right here is a really good way to end up with a nickname like Lefty. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I feel like, why tempt fate? You know what I'm saying? But my wife, she's into it. This was like on her bucket list. So she goes and decides to ride the alligators, all right? And so I see this picture, and it disturbed me. It bothered me, but whatever. We have life insurance, and it's just, and so I'm like, I was disturbed. But I wasn't as disturbed by this picture as I was by the next picture. Go ahead and bring this up. It's my daughter, okay, for those of you that don't know. Okay, this is 2018, so she's 9 at the time, 9-year-old girl. I'm like, okay, now, we didn't talk about this. We didn't pray about this. This was not, you just decided to do it and whatever. But today I'm gonna talk to you about the gator, about alligators and crocodiles. And I wanna actually start today by talking about the obvious strengths of the gator and the crocodile. Alligators and crocodiles, okay? We're gonna start with some of the stuff we know, their bite strength, okay? The strongest bite strength in the whole animal kingdom comes from the Nile crocodile that has a bite strength of 5,000 PSI, 5,000 pounds per square inch that they bite down. Just for context, the average adult male, which we don't have any average adult male in this room, come on, you're all above average, but if we were to be able to find one, and they bit down as hard as they could, okay, it's about 150 PSI. So 5,000, that's like 33 times the amount of pressure. So they have incredible jaw pressure. Their speed is freaky fast. Alligators are able to swim and run at about 20 miles an hour. Context. Usain Bolt, you heard of him? Quick, good feet, right? Runs 100 meters, world record. He, at his average speed in the 100 meters is about 23 miles an hour. So a gator's right behind him, like right behind him. Really fast. They swim at about the same, 20 miles an hour. In fact, you can freak yourself out. You go and you can see videos on YouTube of alligators swimming alongside speedboats and keeping up. Michael Phelps, remember that dude? This guy, the guy that slapped his own back and stuff, big feet. You know what I'm talking about? The swimmer. He can go top speed between 5 and 6 miles an hour. These things go 20, so they're fast. They can hold their breath up to 24 hours. Most of the time, gators will go down. They're down there for about 30 minutes at a time on average, but they can hold their breath up to 24 hours. They're as good as any animal at functioning in both water and land. Their skin is virtually impenetrable. We know all about their skin. We know all about their tails. But the reality is, for a gator, the only vulnerable place in their skin is about a quarter size, what they call the kill zone. And it's right behind their eyes and right behind their skull plate. It's just about a size of a quarter is the only place that they're vulnerable. Today, what I want to talk to you is actually about weaknesses, okay? You see this picture of my daughter on this gator, and of course, the first thing you think is my daughter, but what I really want to focus on is the gator. I want to focus on the weakness. Amidst all the strengths, the weakness of an alligator. Their jaws work just like ours. The top doesn't move, but the bottom moves. And so an alligator is tremendously weak at opening its mouth. In fact, we have more jaw power in opening our mouths than gators do. That's why if you go to Gatorland, they tape the mouth shut, and they don't even most of the time use duct tape. Sometimes they'll even use electrical tape, like the stretchy tape, to keep the mouth shut. That's why a 9-year-old girl can jump on your back and hold your mouth shut, because you're that weak to open your mouth. You know, a lot's been made out of strengths finding, okay? Like if you look into personal development or leadership development, I think it was Marcus Buckingham wrote a book a number of years ago, Strengths Finders 2.0. If you go in Google and you type it in, you can take the test and it'll spit it back to you. Man, here's your strengths. This is what you're great at. And of course, the great philosophical concept of saying you're going to make your greatest contributions to the world in your strengths. It's so true. If you lead anything, you better know your strengths. You better be self-aware enough to know not only where you're good, but where you're weak. And what do you do with your weaknesses? But you delegate those weaknesses, right? You go, I'm not very good at this, so I'm not gonna make my greatest contribution to the world in my weaknesses. I'm gonna go find somebody who's strong where I'm weak, and we're gonna put them on the team. On our staff, we have a little slogan. We say, your strengths give you a role, your weaknesses give you a team. Because you're strong at some things, you get to be on the team. But because you're weak in some areas, you have some teammates. And so that's how we think about strengths. And I would say that's good teaching. That's good thinking. At some point, you have to know your strengths. God's given you gifts. Paul talks about it in Ephesians 4. He lays out all these different gifts. He's like, know your strengths. Make your greatest contribution through your strengths. But friend, what I'm going to tell you is although your greatest kingdom contributions will come through your strengths, your greatest personal discipleship will come through your weaknesses. Today, I want to talk to you about weaknesses. And if I do my job, I'm going to have you thinking, I want you to think totally differently about your weaknesses. Let's jump into the scripture, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We show up, the Apostle Paul talks about his own personal strengths and weaknesses. In fact, if we were to back up to chapter 11, you show up and Paul is actually sort of bragging about his strengths. And the reason he's doing it is because he was being questioned whether he was a bona fide apostle or not, whether he was actually as good as the other people that do the same job that he did. And so Paul is like, I don't even like to brag, but you guys like people who brag because these other people are bragging, and now you're questioning because I'm not bragging, so I'll go ahead and boast. He's like, I'll tell you how good I am. Have you ever been in that place where you're actually competent at some things and somebody's calling your competence into question and you're like, excuse me? Okay, do you know who you're talking to? Okay, I've been doing this a while. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, bought the t-shirt, sold the t-shirt, started a t-shirt company, sold the t-shirt company, and started another company. Come on, you know who you're talking to? I know what I'm doing. Don't come question my competence. Paul's doing this. He's going off. Okay, he's like, oh, they're apostles? What have they done? They've done that? I've done more. I've done this. Have they ever done that? I mean, he's going off. In fact, he ends up just like going full flex, lays out his resume. He goes, listen, man, these apostles, how resilient are they? He goes, I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I made it through a shipwreck. None of them did that. They could sit and talk a big game. I made it out of a shipwreck. He said, I've been beaten with rods. I've been beaten with whips. I've been in danger to my own countrymen. I've been in danger to people I don't know. I've gone without food. I've gone without sleep. I've taken a licking. I'm still ticking. Who are these apostles, these fake apostles? Okay, so he's like, he goes, I feel like a madman. So he says. And so he's ripping off all of his strengths, all the things he knows, all the things he's done. Then he gets to chapter 12, so the next chapter, and he goes, man, on top of all that, he said, I've been so connected to God. I received such revelations basically like God was downloading things from heaven to my mind, my heart. He's like, it was so divine, so powerful. He goes, sometimes I don't even know if I'm in my own body. He's like, it's like an out-of-body experience. He goes, I think I may have been caught up to the third heaven. Okay, what's the third heaven? Is there like levels to heaven? No. In that day, they would look at the clouds and they would call the clouds in the sky, they called it the first heaven. And then what was beyond the sky, they would see the stars and the moon and everything, and they called that the second heaven. And then the place where God is like the third heaven. So Paul's like, I think I might have been caught up to where God is, and I'm getting these revelations. Now, let's think for a minute. Paul's greatest contribution to the body of Christ, to the kingdom of God, and to the world was through his strengths. It was through his resilience, his ability to make it through a shipwreck and still plant churches that ended up being, proliferating the gospel to the ends of the earth. It was the downline of the Great Commission. And then he says also like his strengths of revelation from God written. Paul wrote over half of the New Testament. That was his great contribution. We're still teaching and talking about the stuff that were his revelations from God. It wasn't just he was a talented writer. God was revealing things to him that he wrote down. His greatest contributions were there. But he said in the middle of all this resilience and all of these accomplishments and all of this revelation, so right in the middle of all of that, he said, I had this thorn in my flesh, this thorn. He doesn't tell us what the thorn was, and he's clearly using it metaphorically. He's saying there was a disruption in my flesh. There was something I was really uncomfortable. There was something that made me feel weak. Have you ever had a thorn in your flesh? Now let's go literal for a minute. Have you ever had a splinter? Okay, a splinter. You can't even hardly see it. You gotta like really look. It's like this tiny little thing that somehow every nerve ending in your entire body is connected to. It disrupts your whole life. Let somebody touch it, like, okay, like it hurts. And of course, somebody's like, no, you gotta tweeze it out now. You gotta tweeze it out. And so they're in their tweeze, you're like, oh, like it's just this tiny little, that has totally ruined your life. It's ruined your day. It's started to infect you. And Paul says, man, I've got this thorn in my flesh. And look what he says in 2 Corinthians 12:8. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Of course, in conventional wisdom, he's going, look, I survived the shipwreck, but this thorn is a pain. And he's going, God, if you just take the thorn out, I think I could survive more shipwrecks. If you take the thorn out, I think I could plant another church. If you take the thorn out, I think I could write another book. Lord, take it away. He said, I pleaded 3 times for the Lord to take it away, verse 9. But he said to me, and then these are quotations from the Lord. He says, God said to him, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient. He gives us another layer of grace. And he said there's something about weaknesses that actually demonstrates God's power in a greater way. There's some discipleship, personal discipleship moment or lesson that happens only with the thorn in the flesh. We tend to think conventional wisdom, in order to make ourselves as lovely as possible, is to try to minimize the unlovable parts of us. That's sort of natural to do, right? We tend to think of our own personal net worth value as like my strengths minus my weaknesses equals what I'm, like how lovable I am. And so any area, when I talk about weaknesses, don't necessarily think of like everything you're bad at, because there are some things that you're not talented in that aren't even that embarrassing, right? You're just like, no, I'm not good at that. Other people are. That's not me. I'm not talking about just areas where you lack talent. I'm talking about areas that make you feel weak, embarrassing things. Areas where someone could hurt you or embarrass you. Areas that when people tease you, even if it's not mean-spirited, it still hurts. That type of stuff. The stuff you've tried to fix. Because what do? We have an unlovable part of ourselves. We decide, we kind of have 2 plans. One, I'm going to try to build it up to make it as lovable as possible. And 2, I'm going to try to conceal it so that just few people see it as possible. Because if you get close enough to me, you're going to see this unlovable thing, which would then make me less lovable. And Paul says there was something about the unlovable thing, the thing in the flesh he couldn't extract. He couldn't move on from it. He couldn't get it out. He couldn't delegate it. And he said there's something about the fact that he was loved with it that gave him this revelation of love and grace on a whole nother level. Let's look at a bigger definition of grace. We tend to think of grace as forgiveness of sins. And that's true. Like you sin and God forgives you, that's grace. But there's more to it than that. Grace is more than just being forgiven for wrongdoing. Grace is being fully loved in your weakness. I mean, think about the magnitude of love when it comes to you when you're unlovely. It's a whole different magnitude of love. Like, how hard is it to love someone who's all lovely? Like, imagine if you could do it. Just imagine you could figure out how to focus on your strengths and make them really strong, and then to minimize your weaknesses where your weaknesses were at least somewhat lovely. Imagine if you were totally lovely, and then somebody loved you, but you were totally lovely. It's like, well, that's not hard. It's not that great. I mean, anybody can love somebody who's fully lovely. This is why when Paul writes about grace, look what he says. He says in Romans 5:6-8, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us. Now look what he says, verse 7. Now most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, although somebody might perhaps be lovely enough They might perhaps be really good. They might be willing to die for an especially good person. Like if you had somebody who was almost all lovely, maybe somebody would be willing to die for them. Verse 8, but God showed his great love by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners, when we were totally unlovely. All right, I'm gonna start with an innocuous example and then I'm gonna move my way up, okay? This is a true story. About 8 years ago, I was at a conference with my family and some friends, and we were in Orlando, Florida, and while we were there, we're like, hey, let's take a day, let's go do some fun stuff. So we go to Universal Studios, we eat a meal, and then it's time to ride rides. I'm a ride rider, okay? I'm the dude who goes to Cedar Point. I don't care what the fast pass costs. Give me it right now. I'm going to the front of the line. I'm gonna ride everything. As soon as I get off, I'm literally running to the next thing. I'm gonna get on that. I'm running to the next thing. So we're at Universal. I'm like, I'm riding everything at least twice. Who's with me? And one of the people on our team who's, she's a woman who's so close to me, still very close. She's like a sister to me, very, very close. And she's like, oh, you know, I don't like roller coasters, man. She's like, I get motion sick, you know. And I was like, ooh, man, okay. And she's like, yeah, you know, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden. You guys go on without me. And I'm like, are you sure? Because we really love you to be with us. She's like, no, I don't want to be a burden. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh, that's good. I didn't want you to be a burden either. And so I was like, okay, if you insist. And I'm like, hey, I'm rolling. And so I led a crew, and we're ride. Did the whole day without her, rode all these rides, meet up at the end of the day. She's like, I'll be fine, I'll be by myself. I like being by myself. We meet up, and she's like, how was it? We're like, oh, it was great. We did this, and this did that, and blah, 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 blah. If I was doing the same thing now, like right now, I had the opportunity, same place, same scenario, I would do it totally different. I would do it totally different based on the discipleship of this verse. You know what I would do? She'd say, I don't like roller coasters. I'm not going to ride it. And she's like a sister to me. I would say, well, let's do something else. No. I don't want to hold you guys back. It doesn't matter. Whatever. We can ride roller coasters anytime. We're here with you. I want to hang with you. What do you want to do? Let's do something. Let's figure it out. Let's do something we can all do. No. Because I know her. She would feel bad. No, I don't know. I don't want to hold you guys back. You're not holding us back. I'm here with you. I won't have you forever. I won't always be with you. Tomorrow's not promised. Let's figure something out we can all do together because I want to be with you. Now, what she could do is to sit there and feel bad. Oh, I owe you guys an apology. Oh, guys, I feel so bad because, you know, I held you back. I slowed you down. It's all my fault. Or she can either feel bad and guilty and shameful, or she can stop for a moment and go, man, it feels really good to be loved enough to have somebody forsake all the stupid rides to want to be with me. Instead of feeling like the one who's slowing everybody down, to go, wow, I'm that loved. What a cool wave of grace. In my weakness, you know, I didn't choose motion sickness. No one does that. I'd like to be able to ride the rides, but for some reason I can't. But these people care more about me than they do about the rides. See, we have things all the time that cause us people have to slow down for us, you know. It might be the aging process. It might be a weakness in some way. They see a vulnerability, and yet, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the vulnerability. I'm talking about the area where you feel weak, the area where you feel like a burden, the area where you feel slow. Your flesh can't keep up. Paul says, I learned something about God. There was this discipleship moment where God saw the weakness of my flesh and loved me when I couldn't keep up. And the fact that he demonstrated love there was a whole different wave of grace and love. Anybody can love a fully lovely person. Where are you unlovely? And to receive love there. All right, let's ramp it up a little bit. I'm not thinking of any particular individual story, but I've heard this story many, many times. You have a couple, they fall in love, they get married, they start planning the family. We're going to have this many kids, and I can't wait to have kids, and we're going to have 1 or 3 or 5, and we're going to have this many years apart. And They plan this whole thing out. They're going to have your eyes and my hair and blah, 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 blah. And they start, and then they begin the process of trying to have a family, and it's not happening. So they go in and start to get tested and find out somebody's infertile. Maybe him, maybe her. Somebody's responsible for not being able to have a child. And I've talked to both men and women who were the one who had the weakness, who had the vulnerability, who had the deficiency. And the first thing that hits is this tremendous sadness and a personal feeling of inferiority and responsibility. It's my fault we couldn't accomplish the dream. It's my fault we couldn't stick to the plan. And feeling their own pain, feeling the pain of like they let this person they love most in the world down. And then I've heard them externally process this concept. I wonder if he was being fully honest, if he knew that I wasn't going to be able to do this, if he knew that I was infertile, would he still have chosen me? If she knew I wasn't going to be able to give her a child out of her own body, would she still have chosen me? And you can spend the rest of your life feeling shame, feeling guilty, feeling responsible for a thorn in the flesh, for a weakness, an inferior, and something I can't do that I wish I could do. I can't help it. I just can't. There's nothing I can do about it. You can spend the rest of your life rejecting love. You can spend the rest of your life building up walls, or you can allow yourself to be loved in your weakness. Imagine while you're having that thought, I wonder if he would still have picked me. Imagine a husband going to his wife and saying, if I knew then what I know now, I would pick you every time, every day, twice on Sunday. You are worth more to me than anybody else. You're worth more to me than 1,000 kids. You're worth more to me than any dream. I'd wipe every dream off to be with you. I pick you every single time. You can spend the rest of your life feeling shame, feeling guilt, feeling inadequacy, feeling the thorn in your flesh, having it hit every nerve, or you can allow yourself to receive a wave of love and grace that's even greater than if you were fully lovely. Paul says, I saw a dimension of God's grace with the thorn. I was resilient enough to survive the open sea. I was resilient enough to have revelations from heaven, to make my great contributions to the world, but doggone it, there was something about that thorn that helped me see God's grace even greater. I'm going to keep reading in the text because after he says, the voice came back, my grace is sufficient, my power is made perfect. Look what he says, in weakness, not in spite of weakness, in your weakness, the fellowship of suffering. Look what he said next. He said, therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses. We tend to think of that statement, I will boast in my weaknesses. We tend to think of that as hyperbolic language, hyperbole. You know, oh yeah, I boast in my weaknesses. No, he's saying, I received waves of love and grace in my vulnerability that I thought, if I was altogether lovely, I'd be easy to love, but this is where I'm hard to love, and I'm loved anyway. He said, because of that, he said, I began to boast in my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest in me. Verse 10, he said, that's why for Christ's sake, I delight in thorns. I delight in weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. I'm going to tell you why this is so hard for us to get. Because if you were ever trusting enough to show your vulnerabilities to someone, or they were close enough to see it, what ends up happening a lot of times is the people that know us the best have the capacity to hurt us the most. Why? Because they know where the kill spot is. They know about the truth about your jaw, that you got 5,000 PSI going this way, but you're real weak going that way. So at some point, somebody you love, you end up in a conflict, you end up in a bad season. And what do arguments and fights do, but they devolve. So you go, well, but you did that. Well, you did that. Well, you didn't do that. Well, you didn't do that either. Well, you're weak there. Well, you're weak there too. And what do? they devolve all the way down to where we're looking for the biggest vulnerabilities. And it comes from the people closest to us. I read a list this week. I looked up 60, it was a list of 60 of the harshest things people had ever heard. Probably 90% of these things came from family and friends. It was stuff like, you'll always be just like your dad. You're just like your mom, which that carried some major deep wound. That was a kill spot. Yeah, so-and-so committed suicide, no wonder because of you. Hey, we're in this situation because all you do is fail. It's only a matter of time till you fail again. 60 different things. I couldn't even make it through the list. It broke me seeing other people's things. They're going, and this came from my parent. This thing came from my sister. This thing came from my first wife. This thing came from my second husband. This thing came from my best friend. Why? Because they know your kill spot. They know that your mouth can clamp down, but all I got to do, a 9-year-old girl can hold your mouth shut. So they find your vulnerability. And by the way, you may have done it to them too. You're hitting their kill spot, they're hitting your kill spot. And you end up in a situation where somebody knows your weaknesses and they're on your back, holding your mouth shut, hammering you in this quarter-sized spot. Boom, 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 vulnerabilities. And so you go, death, roll my way out of this thing, get out of here, never again. Do everything to keep somebody off my back. Stay off my mouth. Stay away from. And the sad news, friend, is that I can't promise you that moms and dads won't mess it up. I can't promise you brothers and sisters won't mess it up. I can't promise you lovers and romantic relationships are going to get it right. I'm convinced there are some people that have very short-sighted thinking, and they try to win a fight in a moment and maybe don't even understand the magnitude of what they're doing to you in your weakness to go, I can't be loved here. I can't be loved here. I got to conceal it. You can't see. When I'm exposed, when you see my kill spot, I can't trust anybody. I can't promise you healthy relationships with everybody. Although what we do get here from Paul, by the way, is a pretty good code for what a marriage maybe could look like, maybe should look like, to be fully exposed in my vulnerability and love, not in spite of it, but in it. I see exactly where you fall short, and I will not expose you to the world, and I will not beat you over the head with it, and I will not remind you of it. I love you in that state. But we don't always get it from people. What we always get it from is God. And I think what happened is when somebody jumped on your back, held your mouth shut, and hit you in the kill spot, you not only cut them out of your weaknesses, you cut God out of your weaknesses. And you felt shame like he's bubbling it up in front of you. And Paul said, man, that thorn did me a big favor. Because that thorn hit every nerve in my body. And it was something I couldn't extract. I couldn't take it out. It caused me an awful lot of pain. He said, but when I invited God into it, he said, hey, my grace is sufficient. My power is made perfect in weakness. In fact, Paul goes on to write about this in Romans 8, 38 and 39. He said, I'm convinced. He said, I'm convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. He said, I've had the grace show up in my thorn, in my deficiency, in my lack, in my weakness, in my vulnerability. I've had it show up so many times. He said, I'm convinced nothing. God's seen every thorn. He said, I'm convinced nothing can separate me from God's love. He said, not death or life, angels or demons, fear of today, worries about tomorrow, no thorn. Not even the powers of hell, he said, can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky and above the earth or below. Indeed, nothing in all creation. There's not a thorn. There's not a deficiency. There's not a weakness that can separate us from the grace and the love and the magnitude and the acceptance of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. So you got to think different about your weaknesses instead of hiding them from God. Why don't you allow God to love you not in spite of your weakness, in your weakness, in your relapse, in your weakness, in your failure, in the area that feels like chaos. Your flesh keeps failing. Others hit your kill spot. God has not hit your kill spot. His grace is sufficient. His power is made perfect in your weakness. Here's what I want us to do. Let's take a moment right now. Let's expose our hearts to God. And instead of one more time going, oh, I don't want to be a burden. Oh, but Lord, oh, I'm so embarrassed. God, please. To just allow the exposure to God to give you a revelation of his grace in your weakness. Where do you feel vulnerable right now? Where do you feel weak? What are you actively trying to cover up? What's hitting every nerve in your body right now? Bring it to the Lord and let him give you strength and grace, not in spite of, but in your weakness.